What's up, you guys? Thanks for tuning in to another video. Today, I wanted to talk about a conversation that I think can't be had without having to kind of acknowledge the elephant in the room. This jacket doesn't fit me. That was a bad joke. I don't even know if that made any sense. I was trying to act like the jacket is the elephant in the room. That is not the elephant. It's actually a very serious elephant. There's been a lot of conversations happening online about Ariana, in light of the first night of the Eternal Sunshine tour that she's on currently, happening. I think it was like 2 days ago now. I don't know. I feel like I haven't been seeing any clips from like any other shows. I don't know if it's every night or whatever. But there's been a lot of conversation happening right now about her body and about what she looks like. And there's been conversations. I mean, her being a woman in the limelight, there's been conversations around her body since she became famous at 16, 17 years old, and she's 32 now, right? But it's definitely ramped up and has become unavoidable, like truly unavoidable within the last, I would say, like year or two. And I feel like a really, really big part of the discussion surrounding her body, and I kind of felt like, I don't know, I was reflecting on what I wanted to say, if I wanted to say anything at all. I have said in the past that I think a lot of this conversation is kind of useless, just because none of us know her. We don't know her personally. We don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, and we can't make her do what we think is best for her. So I was like, truly, what's the point of having this discussion? Now, I understand the angle of saying, well, we want to talk to the impressionable girls who are watching her. We want there to be a competing narrative out there. There is that angle as well. Personally, I was just, as someone who went through an ED and, really properly healed, which is not something that I think a lot of people get to experience, I just kind of felt like it was better to sit this one out. But I kept hearing this point bringing up of like the justification of why we can talk about this, which, mind you, there's a lot of people who are saying like pretty much any contribution to this conversation, any person contributing to this discussion, any person, and also Wiccan in the back. I literally didn't even know that. I forgot. I have 2 Wiccan posters actually. I love Ariana. I've been a fan of her since 2013 when I was like 8 years old and Yours Truly came out. Love Ariana Grande. Was obsessed with Kat Valentine. Like, she's my favorite person in the world. Okay. So nothing I'm ever saying is coming from a place of like having any sort of like dislike for Ariana. She was the first concert I ever went to for her, I think, My Everything tour. Anyway, I think that a lot of the conversation happening around her, or a lot of the people that are like dissenting, saying that like we should not be having this discussion, is coming from a place of like, it's inappropriate. We shouldn't be talking about women's bodies, all of that. And like, I don't know. I think today I'm not particularly interested, I guess, in debating the value of the discussion and debating whether or not it should be happening. I do think some people are disingenuously applying the concept of like, don't talk about a woman's body here. Just because like, as much as I do think there are 100% people that are engaging in this conversation for salacious reasons, I do think some people are expressing like genuine concern. And I think that my fear does become, if there are just people that are like kind of making fun of her, you do want someone who can kind of like neutralize the conversation a little bit. I don't know. This feels so sensitive. I don't know. Like, I feel like more uncomfortable talking about this than like other controversial points I made before. Anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about today was this point being thrown around a lot, which is that there are young impressionable girls who are looking at Ariana, or they're looking at these other celebrities, these thin celebrities, and they are being told that this is like an aspirational, healthy way to look, and wanting people who are talking about this, bringing this up, are saying like, we want to be another narrative. We want to be an alternative voice for them to hear in this discussion right now. And that's why we're having this discussion. I want to talk to somebody who grew up on the internet. Got my first phone in the 4th grade. Okay, I've been online for much longer than I should have been online. I think I made an Instagram account probably in like the 3rd grade. I made it on my mom's phone. And so I grew up online, and I grew up seeing these really small bodies. And so I want to talk about it from the vantage point of one of those girls who people are very worried about, people who are very worried about and very much want to protect. I would say that there's so many narratives that are telling you that being really, really small is desirable. And it's not just like one celebrity being skinny. There's a whole industry surrounding this. There's a whole industry around glamorizing shrinking. There's a way that we reward. We put them on the cover of magazines. We tell women who dare to take up space, dare to eat enough food, that they're ugly, that they're unattractive, that no one's gonna want them. There's so many voices like affirming the same idea to you that shrinking is like a good use of your time as a girl. That like that is one thing that I think like a lot of people are kind of honing in on Ariana Grande as if she like invented the concept of wanting to be small, which is like really peculiar to me. But there's a lot of different voices. And so if I'm putting myself kind of back in the mentality of like where I was in like middle school when my ED developed, a lot of what came out, and like this is also something I've talked about on here before, which I think is really necessary to bring up, is that my motivation surrounding being disordered, I was very aware that this was unhealthy. I was very aware that it had terrible health implications. I was very aware that people were going to be concerned for me. And that was explicitly my goal. I uploaded a YouTube video saying, you know, the truth behind my ED, and I talk about all of that in much more detail there. But I knew that this was not a good idea. And that was exactly why I wanted to be disordered. Was because I wanted the attention, because I wanted the care, because I felt overlooked, I felt weak. And because I felt like, you know, based off of all of the narratives that I had grown up receiving around women's bodies, that being weak, being small, that should have been my goal, that was going to be the thing that increased my value. That was what informed my disorder, and that was what informed my fixation on shrinking. And so I'm saying all of that because I think that I think people feel the need to be like, this is unhealthy. And it's like, I think there's a lot of people who know. Which is what's making me think that the conversation does need to, at some point, go beyond any one celebrity. Because it's a much larger force that's leading women to be fixated on their own shrinking. Now, I think if we wanted to like specifically kind of hone in on like the role of the internet, I did get on like ED Twitter at some point. I think the generation before me, probably if I was just born, honestly, just like a few years earlier, it probably would have been like ED Tumblr. I think ED Tumblr still exists. I'm really not sure. Tumblr was not my place. But I was on ED Twitter, and which still is alive and well, where I like actively learned a lot about EDs, got a lot of like really practical tips, was able to kind of like engage in my rumination, without distraction. You know, ED Twitter was just full of other girls who had EDs, who were doing their body checks, were posting what they were eating, were posting their body inspo. It was very explicitly pro anorexia. There were some people who were offering ED coaching services where you could hire them, and they would kind of, I don't even know what they would do. I guess it was just like kind of conversations, but like would just bully you into continuing to not eat. You had people who even gave like fatspo, right? Like people who were overweight, who were posting their bodies as motivation to continue on your anorexia journey, right? Because like the worst thing in the world would be looking like them. And so I think what I am realizing, you know, that I think if I had to say like, here is how the internet played a role in my ED, like that was the main thing that happened. Especially since for me, and I don't know if I was a special case in this way, in that I was very aware that what I was doing was disordered. I know some people kind of fall into EDs kind of accidentally. So then there's another angle there where you might see someone's body and think, oh, this body is healthy and this body is like attainable. And more importantly, this body can work, right? Because if we're looking at these celebrity women who are like starring in movies and they're walking red carpets and they're doing their jobs, right? And they're super small, you know, it can really create this idea of like, well, I can have it all. I can be super small and I can work and have whatever career in life that I want to have. I think that there is like a girl who may not know that these things are unhealthy and then kind of like falls into it accidentally. Like that wasn't my experience. And so I think that at the time, you know, if a conversation like this was happening when I was like heavily disordered, I think it just would have pushed me further, because I think I would have looked at all of that and been like, well, exactly what I want is concern. And I want the kind of conversations people are having about Ariana towards me. That would have been my thought process. And I think it would have pushed me further. And so all of that to say that, and I'm one person, I honestly really invite people to, especially if you're someone who has dealt with an ED, or even just kind of like think about yourself when you were young, of how you feel like you would have responded to a conversation like this, or how you thought about really thin women, I was obsessed with really thin girls. I was obsessed with really thin girls. And I think on some level I knew these supermodels that I was obsessed with probably didn't also have the healthiest relationship with food, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because fundamentally what was going on was that I was like, very much fell for the idea of hook, line, and sinker. That being super small was like the most important thing that I was ever going to accomplish in life. So it didn't really matter to me that you could present very compelling evidence that these women were not healthy. It didn't matter because that was the point. And so I think we have to have, I think that's perhaps where like some of my frustration comes in with some of the narrative surrounding Ariana. It's a useful conversation to say, hey, in general, broadly speaking, being really small is not a good idea. Because then, women who are really tiny kind of like or women who are romanticizing being really tiny, who don't know that that's unhealthy, have that competing narrative. However, we do have like another group of women who that may not be what they need to hear. I think what someone needed to tell me was the fact that you look bad. And not in like people are sympathetic for you and you're getting the sort of attention that you want way, as in you look bad and it's like actively like worsening the quality of life of the people around you way. As in you are a burden. Like I think someone needed to say that quite explicitly in order for me to have another angle on this. So I think what I'm imploring, and I've been kind of like expanding my thoughts, I guess, on it as I sat here making this video, is that it's hard because there's so many different people that are listening, and there's so many different people, engaging in this conversation around Ariana, around bodies, whatever. So you never know like what one person needs to hear. And so if you're just saying, broadly speaking, hey, it's not always healthy to be super small, that's useful information for some people. But I also think that we need to sit here and realize that this is a much more nuanced, complicated conversation than we realize. And that for some people, telling them that it's not healthy, telling them that you're concerned over this celebrity or another celebrity is not only not useful, it could be like actively encouraging it onward if their goal is to be concerning. What I think those girls need to hear is that you rendering your body to a state where you are so visibly distressed, so visibly falling apart, concerning, is not a good idea. That you become a burden to people. That these celebrities who you think, oh, they're able to work at this really high level and still be super small. There is a certain quality of art that we're not receiving from them because of the fact that they're body obsessed. You can't function at your best. So even if you're functioning, quote unquote, you're showing up and you're doing your job every day, you're not doing it well. You're not a fun person to be around. Your mental capacity's not there. I think that would have been a useful thing. And also just realizing that death is not a hypothetical. I saw someone saying anorexia has a 10% fatality rate, which in my brain at the time would have sounded really low. I also was I was so depressed that I don't think it really would have bothered me. But I think putting it into context and thinking like, if a loved one that I had was battling an illness that had a 10% fatality rate, it would have immediately been very concerning to me. And so I think broadly speaking with the Ariana situation, what's important is that we have different people who have different relationships with EDs participating in this conversation. If it's going to be had, then there needs to be that nuance there. But I think it's better to just talk about this more broadly because Ariana, none of us know her and she's not listening to most of us. So I think kind of taking her out of the equation is like perhaps better because enough people are weighing in on it that like I don't think any one person needs to contribute. But talking broadly, I think this experience, like watching this happen, is like put a lot of thoughts in my head. It made me reflect on my experience and be like, oh, I want to make this point. I guess that's my best advice right now when we're dealing with this discussion is to decide what you want to say that you think is actually useful. That isn't about like, let's put this person, at the forefront of the conversation and kind of make it like a focus on this one person. Because conversations about EDs need to happen whether or not Ariana Grande is famous or not, whether she's touring or not. This isn't about her, right? I think that's what I have to contribute.